Starting off with Spear, we have Tressa, and I'm eager to talk about her because of my name. She received a lot of great upgrades thanks to the introduction of TP and 6-star. The most notable one was to her 3-hit priority Spear skill, which 6-star changed to a 5-hit with the same potencies as Leon's. So basically, she stole Leon's best multi-hit nuking option, and for a time, she was even better than Leon because she had 5 more base attack from 6-star and an additional 40 from TP, as well as an extra 30k damage cap up.
Yep. I think like overall as a unit, whenever you use her in a spear comp after her upgrades, she's gonna also bring some more utility in the form of tanking because she got even better at tanking than before. She got basically Hanet's passive except only for physical attacks, but in addition to having a 50% chance to dodge, she also gains a BP regen for 1 turn whenever she dodges a hit using the passive. Her EX skill, which is unlocked starting on turn 4, gives front row dodge physical attacks. And in addition to that, if you're using her in a comp with Partitio, it's notable that her taunt also gives front row P attack, which he does not give in his front row spear buff. We can drop her an A for now. Cecily.
Yeah, so they treated Cecily very well with her buffs. They really didn't hold back and gave her the best treatment out of any merchant here. For her TP passive, she got double cast whenever max boosting. So all of her 3-hit AoE attacks become 6-hit AoE attacks with good potency. This is huge for Spear because Spear has generally had low hit counts, which is why they fall off so drastically compared to a damage type like Sword that has had 10 hits since Elrica.
Yep. Yeah, and in EN you can really sort of feel it as we get these EOS sword units starting from Elrica we just got recently. It feels like, you can't really bump the cap up enough to take advantage of, Leon's 5-hit, for example, right? And even then, like his 5-hit, like we talked about, is only 500 potency, right? The sword characters, their potencies are between 720 and 800, distributed over more hits, right? So that's always going to be helpful, especially since before we get to Celestia, we only have one cap up accessory. That is a pretty big drawback for spear units. And until Magnolia, who has a 7-hit nuke, and Cecily, who's a 6-hit nuke, uh, the highest number of hits was Leon, and then Tressa with her upgrade. So just do keep that in mind. This is kind of a recurring theme that's going to show up as we evaluate other damage types. Just to expand upon Cecily's kit, the reason why she's so OP, just to reiterate that, is that her TP passive gives Therion's effect, but her 6-star upgrade was the real, not bow on top, not even cherry on top. It's just like OP. It made her Super Saiyan. It made her 1-star passive that granted her BP regen to start a permanent effect that happens every single turn. And that allows you to do some crazy stuff, right? So let's say, for example, you just had one other source of BP regen. That's 2 BP regen per turn, right? Say that you wanted to do a 3 BP nuke. Well, starting from 5 BP, you use 3 BP, you get 2 BP back. Now you're at 4. You do it again, you're at 3. You can still do it one more time. That's 3 consecutive double cast nukes. And that can be very easily done over a near break without any other support, right?
Yeah, so she's only losing 1 BP per turn. If you have enough sources of BP regen, she can just not lose BP, even after max boosting. Aside from her double casting ability, she also got additional utility.
She has wonderful team support. So now she has a front row spear, axe, and tome damage up in the form of her TP skill. She had an EX skill that's a four times AoE spear that also pierces axe and tome and inflicts spear, axe, and tome res down. So it's kind of like a universal shred plus res down, active res down, right? And the only drawback of this EX skill is that you do have to use her ult first. In a spear comp, it's not really that necessary, especially if you have a character like Roland. It's pretty easy to, with the rest of your spear roster, to get that res down. But just depending on who you have and which comp you're running, if you wanted to get this online, it's also not a significant drawback, specifically also because she has BP regen, right? So even if you expend 3 BP on turn 1 to get her ult up, you're likely to have all your BP back by the time you need to nuke over break.
And it's also double castable, so the Spear Axe Tome Res Down actually gets applied twice.
Well, I think The one issue with the double casting here is that you probably want 2 BP regen. Like you probably want like a long EX in his comp because at this point, this would be already on like let's say turn 3 or 4, right? So you'd want your BP because you're pretty close to breaking. But yeah, the fact that you can double cast it if you use 3 BP means that it sort of accounts for the more wasted turn of using your ult. Moving on to Ludai.
Yeah, so I think Ludai was done pretty dirty. She didn't have a good multi-hit nuking option before, and neither TP nor 6-star fixed that issue.
So she got a TP passive that gives her guaranteed crit when there's a broken enemy, which is nice. However, eventually crit is like just free for pretty much every comp as long as you want to bring Casty. And then even if you don't bring Casty for like 3 other comps, it's like there's someone that can give it to you. And then her 6-star passive upgrade just upgraded her 1-star passive that gave her 30% spear damage up only at full HP. Now it's at 50% HP, which is useless because over break you're going to be back at full HP using a regen. Her TP skill is a 6 times random target spear at very low potency, so it's more of like a shield breaking move, not a nuke. And then her EX skill that you can only use after you use her ult is a 1-hit nuke that restores 1 BP. And it would be nice if this were a better nuke because it would allow her to double 3 BP nuke over break trivially, except for the fact that it's a 1-hit nuke. And then she also doesn't have any innate cap raising among her passive or active skills outside of her 6-star upgrade. She's definitely not very good after upgrades. They undercooked her compared to Cecily. So Dorothea, what do you think about her?
So I think Dorothea's original kit was very uninspired. She was supposed to be a gambling merchant, but there wasn't a lot of that in her original kit. For us, her banner came around the time we were trying to beat a Zerlo NPC, so some people pulled for that. Her purpose in a lot of teams was to just give passive spear damage up to the team, which was decent, since a lot of our spear options at the time, like Ulbrich, didn't have passive damage. The idea was that using her nukes had a chance of causing self-harm, which would deactivate her passive, but it didn't matter because we had regen and she acted last. Enemies attacking her was usually more of an issue since it lowers pre-break damage if you're relying on it, but it would usually be active during breaks if you had any source of regen. So,
We can talk about her upgrades, which is what made her into more of a gambling character.
yeah, so her TP passive gave her Joshua's passive, and the way that worked was that during action selection there would be a 20% chance of him getting a buff.
And then she also got a TP skill that's single target, but it's random number of hits, either 1 or 2. So there's a chance of you getting anywhere between 1 to 4 hits of 600 potency each. There's like a 40% chance that you'll get 1 hit, 45% chance you'll get 2 hits, 10% chance you'll get 3 hits, and a 5% chance you'll get 4 hits. Expected output potency from this move is 1080 potency, which is actually very high for a move that doesn't have qualifications or restrictions. But it is also a high variance move. It's very random, right? So it is something that could be used, for example, in speed clears, but it would be pretty frustrating to plan around, especially since you have no control over it. It's kind of like Joshua's. You just kind of keep using it until you get a run that you want.
Yeah, and to add on to that, despite high potential potency, this skill of hers is only 4 hits max, which is going to run to damage cap issues in a lot of cases. But low hit count high potency nukes like Dorothea's become more valuable the less setup you have. So in very short speed clears, where you don't have enough turns to set up everything, those are the cases where the skill of hers is used.
Yeah, I would say like it's not even as much of a speed clear as it is a meme clear. What you're describing in terms of speed clear potential, like while the Celestia weapons are relatively weak, when she first got her TP upgrade, you could basically use her in non-meme speed clears in Celestia just because the weapons weren't that strong. So getting up to like 4 hits of really high potency, you might not even ram cap with each hit at that point in time. But again, like because of her random nature, I wouldn't say she's super good, but at least she has like some sort of niche over Ludai, who almost has no niche. Leon recently got both his 6-star and his TP buffs, so we can talk about where these buffs land him relative to current spear rosters in JP. The highlight of his kit is his TP active skill, which, when you have his extra attack buff present, will grant you both 30% spear damage up and 30% P attack up in the same action. The problem I see with this is mostly that, I mean, even though it's very action efficient, the issue is that he's not bringing anything new to the table, and by taking up that roster slot, he's actually not providing anything that you wouldn't already have, right? That's the issue. Like, for example, if you bring Richard and you bring Partitio, they can cap active spear damage up. Spear doesn't have a way to grant itself guaranteed crit for the whole party, so then if you bring Casti, it completes the P attack buff as well with Richard. And when you bring Richard and you bring Partitio, with U10 you can get up to 30% alt spear damage up. Once you have Partitio, you basically have even more spear support, especially in the ultimate category. And then once you have Magnolia, you have a self-soloning character. You also got Cecily's 6-star upgrade, so she became your Solon target. And you just basically don't have room for a character that is not significantly better than Cecily. In an already cramped comp, you're trying to bring a character that is only trying to justify himself by having one skill that can be action efficient. And then, of course, his EX skill is only a one-hit nuke that gets doubled, so that's not going to be very relevant, even with the 50k damage up. The BP regen is nice, allowing you to nuke twice, but oftentimes his row partner might even have something more useful to do on one of your break turns. The other 6-star upgrade that he got that I haven't mentioned yet is that his 5-hit spear attack gains priority, which is not really much of an advantage. Not only is it only single target, which means it's not breaking AoE, but being single target means that's probably the role for, something else that should be breaking, right? Like, for example, Roland has his Prio Fire Pierce Spear thing. Those are much more efficient way of breaking for your DPS. Leon's upgrades just came at like a really poor time. They either should have released him earlier or they should have cooked his upgrades harder. That's the problem with him. So Krauser came out before Leon. He was very relevant in spear comms. And then he sort of fell off once we got Solon, who boosted Leon's damage quite a bit. And then once Celestia comes out, everyone becomes weak all of a sudden because we're starting from like the weakest weapons in Celestia. And in that time, he didn't have his upgrades, but his potencies were still really high. So then he became a better nuker than Leon again. And then he also got his upgrades before Leon did. So he got pretty significant upgrades, I would say. His TP passive gives him 100,000 damage cap up, and his TP skill gives spear res down. But his 6-star upgrade came with a pretty good EX skill that gives both power enhancement and his multi-attack enhancement in the same buff for 2 to 5 turns based on boost level. And it also unlocks as soon as he uses his ultimate. So in his case, let's say you end up using his ultimate before break, then you can also use this skill as well. You would not have to worry about one of your buffs dropping off. In terms of content, he was decent for certain content earlier on, and then now he's okay-ish if you really wanted to fit Spear in for the new level 120 NPC in JP. Which region is it called again, Ed?
The town is called Ryu.
Yeah, Ryu level 120. So I think, like, right now, maybe he's worse than Leon, but in terms of like when he actually became available with his buffs and how valuable he was, like just evaluating him as post buff character, you got like actual usable shelf life for him over Leon, who like actually doesn't really have any. So these 3 characters all have like their own advantages. I would say like maybe Tressa actually has the most relevant buffs because she got buffed the earliest and the most, and then his buffs were actually useful for content. He, even though he's the strongest of the 3 right now, he also got his really late after both Cecily and Magnolia were good. So that's sort of how I would rate these 3.
One last point on Krauser, and this also relates to anyone who uses high potency nukes. Currently, high hit count multi-hit skills dominate both Celestia and Orstera. It wasn't like that at first in Celestia, but as more chapters released, our weapons got less and less shitty. Also, while weapons have improved in stats, they still don't give any damage cap up. So even though Krauser got 100,000 damage cap up from his TP passive, his cap in Celestia is just about the same as it was before he got his passive in Orstera.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say he's pretty decent for the level 120 Ryu. And then he was decent for like, some content when the weapon sucked more. So I guess like he had something. I'm just saying like Leon doesn't have any niche if you have Cecily and Magnolia because his upgrades came way too late. And before his upgrades, he had his shitty 5-star stats. It was just like not very good for Celestia, right? All right, let's move on. Partitio. Oh, I would say Partitio. We can put him up here, not because he's a great DPS, but because he's an excellent buffer akin to Richard, and he can also provide BP utility for your team as well.
So I do think people are more or less familiar with Partitio's kit. Like Prim said, he mainly exists to buff spear damage. We even touched on him a little in the Tressa section. I guess I just want to go straight into the complaining.
You
So
want to go
like,
straight to okay, sure.
I feel like Partitio came at a time before they decided to make all of the supports jack. Like all of the supports that came after Partitio are considerably more busted than he is.
Yeah,
Like cast.
definitely. He's actually right before they started cooking everyone extremely hard. Like he's probably the last like reasonably kitted general unit. A general unit, I don't mean general pool. I mean like units mainly meant to make that damage type comp work, like Richard.
One of my issues with him as a unit is that he has no damage cap raising ability. If you look at all of the damage specific supports that came after him, Tiziano, Casti, Hujeb, on top of like the billion of other things they do, they also give cap up to the entire party. Instead of cap up, Partitio gives SP regen. It's not low. It's like 3%.
I would say his main gimmick is his latent power. Let's say you're doing like a near break, right? You can use it on like let's say like the first break turn and then do your nukes, and then you have your BP and then you do it again, and then on your third turn you still have BP because you have like one BP regen or something. It just makes it so that you don't need too much BP regen support in order to do like extended nuking cycle. The other issue is that like he's even worse as a DPS unit than Casti because his only real relevant nuking option that has decent potency is 2-hit spear, which you know it has decent potency, right? But it's still 2 hits, which at this point is not too great. For example, his 4x AOE that becomes 6-hit is only 70 potency at max boost, so it's really weak. That's 420 potency.
Yeah, regarding his DPS in Celestia, he released very early at the start of 6 star, so his high potency 2-hit nuke was actually useful then. But as mentioned before, weapons have improved, so it's a lot easier for anyone to hit the cap. And Celestian weapons still don't come with any damage cap up.
Even if he gave himself a 100k cap, he'd still be like Krauser, only doing a 2-hit nuke. It's not good for nuking. He's just basically, instead of being a DPS general type unit hybrid, which he was sort of meant to be unreleased, he's now just only support. And in terms of how much support he gives to a typical spear comp, it's not really more than Richard, though you can combine it with Richard. The most relevant thing to me in terms of his buff potential is that he allows you to stack another 15% in the ult category for spear damage up. I will say that without hitting all your buff and debuff categories, just because spear already has really strong buffers and debuffers, and EN, when we get to that point, we also have EN Roland, right? You probably don't need to cap your ult category, to be honest, to even just hit your caps on your multi hits, which are 6 hits and 7 hits, right? You just don't, especially since not everyone even has all the cap up raising items. So even if you have 3 accessory slots, you're not going to be able to like put all cap up raising items, right? Let's say you have Bargel A4, the level 120 artifact, that's 200k cap up. If you don't have anything else, it's hard to spread out more for between Magnolia and Cecily anyways, right? So like having all the extra buffing potential isn't actually doing anything because you're just ramming cap. He does have some other pretty good support. For example, he has a Prio Spear, the Sky Spear move. Is it 4 hits or 5 hits?
It's 5 hits.
Yeah, so you can get it like before break, and then you can use it on subsequent breaks as well. Pretty good utility. It's just his problem is like doesn't bring cap up. That's his main problem. If you were just pure utility and brought cap up, even though he doesn't bring the BS like Tiziano, Castian, Huge up, at least he'd be a little bit closer to their potential as a buffer. All right, moving on. Magnolia. Yeah, I would say Magnolia came at a very fortuitous time. Also, I think she was like the first character that gives herself, like she has the self Solon from a passive. I think she's like the first character that got on a passive.
Kirsch's might have got it before her, but the way Kirsch's does it
Yeah,
sucks. And it's
he sucks. Yeah, essentially for her, this potency up is basically free. It's whenever she uses 3 PP on a skill, unrestricted. That's the only requirement. As a character in terms of nuking, she has an extremely strong countdown jump skill that is a 3 times AoE that does 345 potency per hit. And she also has a 7 hit spear when you have speed down, right?
yeah, and in practice, this requirement is really easy to achieve with her 1-star passive, which lowers the speed of all enemies whenever she swaps rows, or just by bringing Signa, who does it by being above 50% SP with her TP passive.
Definitely, especially for a dancer. And I mean, there's not too much about her kit besides her 2 nukes.
Her being able to self salon means you can run 2 damage dealers. You can like have her do her thing while you salon another multi-hitter. So that target could be Tressa using her 5-hit skill, or Partitio using his 4-hit. And once Cecily gets her 6-star, you'll be targeting her exclusively. So you're going to salon Cecily and have Magnolia do her own thing, which means you can have 2 damage dealers with 100% potency up in the spear comp.
Also, her TP passive, you can use this thing called Bravely Second during move selection, and it only has a 4-turn cooldown. So you can use it basically once every break cycle. That's going to give you both guaranteed crit and 50k cap up.
Yeah, and another thing about her 7-hit is that it's a pretty decent multi-hit nuking option, which is huge for Spear because Spear has like so much support, so it's super easy to hit cap, but generally not had a lot of good multi-hitters. So Magnolia is the first multi-hitter to have a multi-hit nuke above 5 hits.
Yeah. So moving on, we have Hikari. If you are not a speed clearer, I believe he is probably in the S tier category. Especially now we have like a lot of support that can help you like delay your first break. A lot of enemies they have like sort of like, for example, like a weakness swap, or they have like an aura after a certain number of turns, or they have like damage threshold related gimmicks. But generally they don't swap weakness sets or apply something that mitigate your damage before your first break if you can figure out a way to like survive like a really strong aura, right? Hopefully it's not something that steals your BP, for example. But even if it is something that steals your BP, you have something like Shauna, right? So Shauna is almost like a staple for Hikari comps because it allows you to kind of dirtle around, and she makes you unable to be killed as she grants her buff. And in that case, like his nuking potential is actually pretty high, and he can also sustain it with a BP battery. So he has like an 8-hit random target spear that does pretty good damage.
If you're bringing Partitio, Partitio's passive relies on having more merchants in your party,
Yeah.
and Hikari doesn't add to that.
Mm-hmm.
That can be a bit of an issue squeezing Hikari into spear comps, especially since you're also going to want to bring someone like Salon to salon him alongside Magnolia.
Yeah, and then
So
Solon's also not a merchant. The thing that Ed is mentioning is like basically if you want to have 4 merchants, that would allow you to get the 15% P attack up. It's pretty trivial to get 2, and then getting 3 doesn't get you anything. It's just SP regen. So it's about like either getting 2 or 4. So if you can't make 4, then you're just giving up 15% passive P attack, which you may or may not need. Right. It's also just that like in those extra slots that you would bring just to allow him to dirtle a little bit better, you could have just brought like better support for Cecily and Magnolia. Like you could have just brought like instead of bring Shauna, you could just bring like Alon EX. It's so much easier. You don't have to waste extra actions dealing with that shit if you're not dirtling around.
So we also ranked Hikari in Sword and placed him lower there. So one thing to point out is that his best spear multi-hit skill is actually higher potency than his sword multi-hit skill. They're also both random target, whereas Cecily's and Magnolia's are AoE and single target respectively, and that limits his use cases.
Yeah, I will say also, don't forget that he does have his EX skill, so especially in Orstera, that can be way more damage, right? Well, we talked about how many buff categories and debuff categories we can easily hit. Well, I mean, Hikari can take advantage of that, right? 16 hit, 16 times 50, right? On one of his break turns. Because, you know, you're dirtling around until you have his double cast. Yeah, I mean, I think in practical use cases, he's worse than both, but like he does have cases where he's better. I think it's fair to put him at the bottom of S. As a damage unit, he's definitely like a tier above these three. Especially now that we have the support to make his Dirtling work a little bit better. Of course, like we said, I don't think he's as good as these, because these you don't have to build around some weakness that Hikari has, but Hikari does have good use cases for sure.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So, Nona. So she got a 4-hit random spear that gives front row critical damage up, but like we have a lot of sources of spear damage up. We have Partitio, we have Cecily, we have Richard, and even Salon has a front row spear damage up buff, so it's not relevant at all.
Yeah. Like having damage up is nice always, especially if you don't have every unit. However, this is spear we're talking about. Everyone already has Richard. Even if you don't have Partitio, it's like immediately becomes less valuable. We can just talk about what her upgrades are and then explain why they're not super good. Her TP passive is while in front row, she grants front row 15% passive crit damage up. Her TP active is a 4-hit random target spear, like Ed said, that gives active 15% crit damage up. But this is not extensible. Her EX skill affects the front row and gives 100% alt gauge and 30% potency up. It's hard to tell like exactly how useful this is. I think in certain cases it could be helpful, especially if this 100% alt gauge is hitting characters that haven't acted yet with BP, so that they can just use their alt and then use their BP, right? Especially since a lot of characters have a condition where they have to use their alt first. Does that make sense? So like, you can charge their alt, let them use their alt first, then let them use their BP, instead of using their BP, then using their alt and not having BP. In a certain sense, it could be useful, but I would say it's pretty niche. And the 30% potency up part, well, like, that part becomes useless once you're using Casty's EX skill.
So Nona feels like she could go like maybe above Voludai because she has like
she has like some gimmick thing going on.
She has like potential for a niche, but like she's never used it.
Yeah.
I did feel like putting her in there because her TP is entirely focused on doing damage, but it's not enough.
Yeah, I don't think she. I mean, there might be some niche case where you need to get some alts out. Could be useful.
Maybe.
All right, Roland. He's still the best debuffer for Spear.
Yeah. Most people playing in EN should be aware of how much he does for Spear, and he remains good in the future. His debuffs are too valuable. The JP version Roland is worse, but he's still brought along for his debuffs, and his 15% ultimate spear res down in single target fights. So you pick your flavor of support, Partitio or Richard, and then you'd probably bring Roland instead of bringing the other one, since ultimate res down is a category by itself. He does lose some value when there's more than one enemy, since his ult and best debuffing skill only targets a single enemy, but overall still very powerful. JP Roland is still very, very good as a debuffer, and our version will be even better.
I guess we can just finish talking about his kit. His TP skill is a 4 times random target spear that automatically swaps him to the back row, which is pretty nice. And it gains 1 additional hit. So this is also a move that is mostly for a single target scenario. He just falls off a little bit in AoE scenarios in JP because there are other really good options you can bring in that case. But it also becomes a 5-hit with his row swap mechanic.
Yeah, this is basically just a 5-hit skill that you can use to shave shields, but it's not too relevant. He's not a very good nuker, and he's also not going to get all of your buffs between his responsibilities as well as his row partner's responsibilities.
Alright, Oskha is undoubtedly the best spear DPS right now, especially in Orstera, and also especially if you have his U10. In Celestia, however, he might be a worse DPS than Cecily and Magnolia.
Yeah, so to explain why we care so much about having him at U10, we should go into his 2 main mechanics. The first is that he can level 6 boost, like Xanthos. The second is that whenever he's at 0 BP, he gains 300% potency up, quadrupling his damage. The trade-off is that you can't boost skills without BP, which isn't a problem with his ultimate. Oskha's only good nuking options lie in his ultimate and his EX skill. His ultimate actually becomes his second best damaging option at 0 BP, so you'll want to use a skill that can apply his no BP gain buff a turn before. His best damaging option, his EX skill, is only usable after using his ultimate once, and can deal damage at both 0 or 5 BP, but it's strongest at 5 BP and paired with Salon's ultimate. It's also one use only. So there are 2 break rotations you can do. You can use his TP skill first, which is a self buff that applies the no BP gain effect, then his ultimate, and then his EX, all at 0 BP. Using his ultimate skill once is a requirement for his EX skill. This is what most people that have him at U9 will end up doing. With U10, however, you can use it once before break, then Salon ult on his max boosted EX skill, then followed by his second ultimate. This gives you the highest damage output from him.
Yeah, in a way, he's a bit of a whale character. The other reason why he's a bit of a whale character is he also has quite low base P attack compared to a lot of the other modern JP DPS units. And as we know, like the lower your P attack is, the more you benefit from an additional 50.
It's actually comparable to Cecily's, who was kind of like made fun of in EN for her low base P attack.
Yeah. I will say one of the advantages of him is that you, just like with A2, you can consolidate out Signa's slot, right? Because you don't need her for res downs, and then you wouldn't also need her for her ult either, because you can get 25% between him and Lucetta. And then, just as Ed talked about, what you would do with him is that you would use his ult and then his EX skill and then his ult again. And then the second time you use his ult, it would be at 3 times potency due to being at 0 BP. Since his EX skill gains him that BP gain prohibition without you needing to use a different skill that gives him that effect. I think the point that we're trying to make is that this character functions wildly differently between like A0 and A1 U10. He's significantly worse if you don't have his U10. And also quite a bit worse without his A1 as well. He's not going to hit cap, so he basically loses every single point of damage that he would have gotten from A1 due to his high multi-hit count.
Yeah. Are we putting him below Magnolia?
It depends on what version of him you have, right? If you don't have U10, I think he's definitely worse than Magnolia. If he has everything, then he's better for like one break.
Yeah, they made his EX skill 1 use per battle. He's a lot similar to Ring a Bell in that way. But like, if you've been keeping up with the meta, like if you're interested in this sort of content and you've been around for a while, I feel like you should be able to one break most content by the time Oskha comes out.
Yeah. Especially with how strong he is, and he's only gonna get progressively stronger in Celestia, because we know, like, we just keep getting mechanic creep, and the content creep never keeps up with the mechanic creep. You always end up getting stronger and stronger relative to new content in terms of damage output. So characters that are good at only one break, it's not as much of a disadvantage. Though, I mean, of course, the character like him is definitely not gonna be as good for wave content, just because you're gonna use his EX skill and it's gonna be gone.
There was this thought I had a while ago. If his EX skill was 2 uses per battle, it would raise Partitio's value a lot, because then you could max boost it twice with his latent power. And then you could double salon that.
Yeah.
And if you're using a comp, you could use his ult on turn 3.
Yeah, you could ult and then EX and then EX and then ult, but because there's only one use, you can't do that. I mean, it's still pretty insane. If you have one U10, he's just insane. Like, he'd do a lot of damage.
It's also noteworthy to mention that like all of his other skills are just not great for nuking.
Yeah.
Like, he's very dependent on his EX and ultimate. All of his other skills are kind of doo-doo.
Yeah, he also has like a 2-hit nuke with 50k cap up and okay power.
2-hit nukes are not really good anywhere now. Not in Celestia, not in Orstera.
Yeah, and then he also has 7x65 random target spear at max boost, but it's not very potent. The potency is way too low. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, for the vast majority of players, maybe Magnolia is just a little bit better.